Students are always looking for enjoyable and significant learning experiences, because when students are interested, that's where learning takes place. We're Globant, a digitally native company focused on making the world a better place. We specialize in reinvention. We've been hard at work helping EdTech companies and learning providers achieve digital transformation in these key areas. More than 15 years helping organizations develop the most innovative digital learning products. And we're just getting started. Let's create new learning experiences together.
Hello, and welcome to the Learning and Technology Forum, which is part of Globant's Reinvention series. My name is Paulette Bailey, and I am the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Lead for EMEA. And I have the pleasure of introducing today's amazing speakers who will be discussing how gaming and the metaverse are transforming the learning experience. Now, before we get started, I would like to go over some quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions during this forum, please enter those into the Q&A feature, and our team will follow up personally to any questions that does not get addressed today. For those who do not know, Globant is a digitally native company that helps organizations reinvent themselves to create a way forward and unleash their potential. We are the place where innovation, design, and engineering meet scale. During the last 15 years, Globant have been partnering with amazing EdTech companies around the world and helped many organizations to build the corporate universities. We blend engineering, innovation, and design with a unique approach to enable learning reinvention. For more information, visit our website at www.globant.com/edtech. Now, I'm going to tell you a little about our speakers. Robert Narshak is a veteran digital media and games executive. Most recently, he was the Chief Operating Officer of Servios, Inc., a leading venture-backed virtual reality startup. Robert is also a long-term professor at the University of Southern California School of Cinema and Television. Robert got his start at the EdTech startup Knowledge Adventure. He has served in numerous executive positions, both at startups such as Glue Mobile, as well as large companies including Electronic Arts, Yahoo, and BBC Worldwide. He's been a member of the Television Academy of Arts and Science and BAFTA, and is a frequent speaker at conferences around the world on digital media and technology. Matias Rodriguez is VP of Technology here at Globant, with a focus on Globant Games. Matias has 18 plus years of experience helping create products including AAA video games and telecommunication solution. He is also the co-inventor of a patent combining video games mechanics and oil and gas, and credited in several video games, including Phoenix Labs' Dauntless and the EA FIFA series. So your moderator today will be Agustin David. Agustin is a senior client partner for education for Globant's US market. Agustin was formerly an adjunct professor at the Anderson School of Management at the University of New Mexico, and later served 2 terms as Chancellor of the Kennedy University in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where he built the university's online learning platforms, tripling student enrollment.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. It's my pleasure to introduce Robert and Matias, who have now come on screen. Robert, Matias, we are excited to hear from you today. And as an educator myself, I'm really quite fascinated of what we're seeing today in the market. You know, the enormous technological advances that we're experiencing in education really are inviting for these kinds of discussions as we begin thinking about how education transforms and heads in different directions that we may have not thought about a couple of years ago. So let me go ahead and just dive into my questions for you. Robert, I'd like to start off by asking you, what is the difference between gamified platform and game-based learning? And what do we mean when we talk about gaming in education?
Yeah, good questions. Let me just start by just giving people the lay of the land in terms of games as an industry. I mean, I just want to reset people's expectations. So there are about 3 billion gamers worldwide, spending about $175 billion in 2022. So it's an enormous industry, as we all kind of know and intuit, up 14% year over year because of COVID. 155 million Americans play games 3 or more times a week. 600 million in China, just to put that in context. So when you think about games, Asia's bigger than North America and Europe right now, so that's important to keep in mind. But the big message on games that I wanted to throw out to begin with is that the average age of a North American game player is 35. Almost 50% of them are female. So if the specter of games puts a pimply teenage boy in your head, I want to encourage you to set that aside, that games are actually really quite, part of everyday life. And plenty of people in our society would play games all the time and would never dream of calling themselves gamers, but they are. So with that context, I think it's important to distinguish between, gamified platforms, right, and game-based learning. So gamification is a term you probably heard. It kind of got coined in 2003, became really popular starting in 2010. Now it's a little bit, people don't like it so much anymore. And the gamification is predicated on the idea of you can infuse non-game environments, learning platforms, for example, with game elements to drive engagement, elements such as competition, leaderboards, badges, achievements. The problem with gamification inherently is that gamification usually is all about extrinsic rewards, right? You're telling people, you're giving them compensation, you're using punishment and reward as a way to motivate behavior. And inherently, that's not fundamentally engaging. People really need and want to be intrinsically motivated. They want to feel autonomy. They want to feel mastery and purpose. And the thing about games, proper games, not just gamification systems, but games in general, is they're deeply, deeply intrinsically motivated. And the reason for that is that games are about learning inherently. Rafe Koster talks about this in a book he wrote, Koster, if you're interested in learning more about that. But in general, if you think about games as a learning environment, just because you're mastering the game mechanics and everything else, but it's part of games, all of a sudden you realize that why games are so inherently engaging. And as a result, educators, for example, have been really over the years very fascinated by integrating gaming into the curricula primarily because they see the kind of engagement that students get through that, and they want to imitate that. With the various degrees of success. I got my start at this startup called Knowledge Adventure, a Bill Gross startup in Pasadena. And we were doing drill and kill games on CD-ROMs, teaching English, math, and other subjects for K to 12. We had 2 brands, which I think is worth talking about real quickly. One was called Jumpstart, character-based, very friendly, and the other one, Math Blaster. And we did a study, and we showed we could see that parents who gravitated to Jumpstart as a brand wanted their kid not to be last in the class. Math Blaster parents wanted their kid to be first in the class. And that was the first time I really got a sense of the power of games to really personalize learning, maybe based on what the parents want from their kid, but also to really target learning for the kid in very different ways. And now games are very, very analytics driven. We capture tons of data. And I think games have this incredible power to really personalize learning in a way that, I hope we get the chance to talk about here. So, the big lesson about games that I always like to tell people is, what my friend Eric Zimmerman likes to talk about. He says, games are to the 21st century what the moving image was to the 20th. And if you think that way, all of a sudden you start thinking that games need to be and should be integrated into much more of what we do out there.
Fantastic. And actually, it's a great lead off to my next question for Matthias, talking about integrating games into other areas. What is your view on how gaming is affecting other industries? So we're not necessarily talking now about education, but what is gaming happening there? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing?
Absolutely. So as Robert mentioned, the big focus on game development has always creating the stories to entertain, but there's a big mechanic on learning and making decisions. There's a big quotes about game development and games that is a series of interesting choices, right? So you are being put in these scenarios, and because it's immersive, because it taps into the like storytelling, suspension of disbelief. Now, we have been seeing applications of game mechanics as in different aspects. Like Robert mentioned, gamification is something that it was a big boom at some point, then it was very washed out because it was basically a big translation, especially in education, of what we were doing previously, right? Rewarding, if you do something well, I give you a reward. Now, there's a very interesting talk about from NASA on GDC, Game Developer Conference, which we have an instance next week, that is called We Are the Space Invaders. And in that talk, they mention how they use video games to understand how a 12-year-old kid can learn to manage a complete fleet of spaceships in less than a week, whether they spend years on grown-ups engineering degrees teaching them to basically operate one single spaceship, right? So when we tap into the game-based learning and let's say more gamified experiences, you can tap into the different elements of suspension of disbelief, some technical aspects on game engines, some immersive aspects of AR and VR. And when you really tap it out into the heart, you can take very big advantage on that to create experiences that are going to have an educational objective. And now you can take advantage of that. And we see a lot of examples, like Ubisoft has educational versions of their Assassin's Creed series where they take away all the violence and you can navigate the setup that they have. So if you have Vikings, you can take a look at the history. If you are in Assassin's Creed Origins, you can navigate Egypt and understand what is happening. Now they take away all the things that probably a lot of people as parents will say, I don't want my kid to learn on these environments. But because the games include researching, a lot of these games actually has people making history, like providing history consultancy, you know, providing a lot of architectural context on that particular area. You can take advantage, you take away all the fun elements, the violence element, but you keep the environment and you keep the engagement that you can get. It's I will strongly suggest to take a look. It's actually, if you Google like Ubisoft Educational, you will see different versions. We have the same behavior from Microsoft and Mojang for Minecraft. You have educational versions of Minecraft that you can take a look. You can have even like Greek worlds that you can navigate, you can play around. And again, we are taking the core elements of the games, the immersion, suspension of disbelief, and we are removing, you know, the entertainment aspects of it, right? And we see even big brands like Fortnite. Fortnite has, you know, Battle Royale, they have the Save the World, but they also have a Martin Luther King world that you can visit and you can revive, you know, Martin Luther King's speech there. And it actually, I think that it provides not only an engagement level, but we always say that we learn better by doing. And by having these synthetic environments, we are basically setting up all the environments for our students to make the decisions, and we can influence a lot of that world and aim them towards, you know, different decisions, different situations that in real life it will be very difficult to illustrate.
Great. You know, and you mentioned Assassin's Creed, which I'm a huge fan, and I've been playing that for years. And one of the reasons I started playing was because I wanted to teach my kids about history. And one of my sons has gotten really into the French Revolution after playing Assassin's Creed Unity. So, Robert, talk to me a little bit about, you know, going along something that Matthias mentioned. Tell me a little bit about what the most strongest and most effective trends you see in terms of student engagement in digital learning.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I wanted to be an astronaut. Kids growing up right now, they all want to be game designers. And one of the biggest trends that I like is stuff that Katie Salen does. She's a professor out of UC Irvine, I believe. It's a program called Institute of Play, which is no longer active, but if you go to Institute of Play website, you see how they try to design curriculum that are basically around doing game design as systems learning. And I think that infusing learning with game design is a very fascinating trend. So for example, the Institute of Play talks about, reframing failure as iteration. What Matthias was talking about is learning can only happen by doing, and then driving engagement by constantly challenging students, but not beyond their abilities so they don't get too frustrated and all of that. Other trends that I'm fascinated by, a lot of it's coming out of COVID, is personalized learning. We're seeing a lot of startups getting funded, places like Learnfully, where their parents all of a sudden hyper engaged with their K-12 kids learning because they're seeing it from home, and they're noticing trends in neurodiversity and attention. And so companies like Learnfully are trying to take advantage of that, and they're getting well funded. Other companies like Wayfinder or Empowerly are using data-driven approaches to actually sort of like help students, for example, in Empowerly's case, to get into colleges. So there's lots of technology platforms emerging around learning and education and games, gamification and games in general. The other thing I'm seeing, which is kind of really fascinating, I'm advising a couple of companies in neurotech right now. There's a big, even Valve, the big company up in Seattle that does the Steam platform for PC games, they're looking at the mind as an interface with the computer, rather than having to go through other sort of intermediary interfaces. So there's a lot in terms of like, how can we tap into brainwaves and all the other tech that are involved with neurotechnology in terms of like really trying to target personalized learning and help people have a more seamless interaction with content. So there's a lot going on right now. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I know, when we start talking about the metaverse, I think it's going to be really interesting to talk about just in general what that means and where we go from there. That's it, I think.
Great. Matthias, and tell me a little bit before we jump into the issue of metaverse, because I know that's something that we've been wanting to talk about. But tell me a little bit quickly, your vision of gaming experience in other industries and what you're seeing right now about how kids and adolescents are impacted and what's happening in the short and medium term. So right now, like I said, Robert just mentioned this, there's a lot of activity going on. What are you seeing on your side?
So yeah, absolutely. As Robert mentioned, there has been a big trend on taking part of not only games, but the game development process in order to translate that to certain mechanics. Robert mentioned this trend of trying to take game design as a horizon for that. Now we are seeing a huge trend of a lot of not only gaming companies, like I was mentioning, like Microsoft and all of that, approaching their IPs and their infrastructure and basically putting at disposal of the education industry. But we're also seeing like technology companies, technology providers that were specifically for gaming, like Unity, Unreal, Autodesk, Photoshop, Adobe, now approaching that on the educational aspect, reinforcing the big trend of STEAM teaching, right? Because game development, it's a inherently multidisciplinary discipline. You have engineers, you have artists, you have a story, you have music, you have architects, you have backend, you may have cloud, you may have blockchain, you may have NFTs. So it's a very diverse background, very diverse disciplines that needs to coexist to basically create a product. So that actually has been a trend before in taking, inspiration for a lot of this. And that's what Robert mentioned. A lot of people wants to go on the game industry because previously there was this big preconception, like, oh, if you're a math wizard, then you can do video games. But now we are trying to be more open in the sense of if you are an artist, if you're a writer, if you're a musician, if you love music, and if you love video games, there's a ton of room for you in the industry. So I think that there's a big opportunity also to partner, like as educational institutions can partner with a lot of these providers, because they also have a big interest. They want people to know Unreal Engine or Unity so they can have future users, and then the industry is also lacking, a lot of manpower. So there's a lot of big forces going on the same direction that I think that is very important. It could be very powerful as like educational institutions can approach partnerships with a lot of these companies. There's a ton of synergy there. And then there's way better ways to teach math, like simple 2D math and physics, doing a platformer game quickly on Unity. And kids will be not only more engaged, but as we were saying, the learning by doing, they will actually remember those concepts. And we still see a lot of challenges. As Globant, we approach this educational institution, and I still remember saying to them, like, hey, you can use this as a platform to teach people. You don't have to make math abstract and boring, and if your students are asking you why I'm learning this and what is the purpose of what I'm learning, it's kind of a big red flag. So I think that you can take advantage of a lot of those things, like synthetic environments, simulations, games. It doesn't necessarily need to be a game. It could be a simulation, and it's going to generate the same engagement level and the same immersion level.
Fantastic, wonderful. I'd like to move on to the issue of metaverse, because that's something that really is, it's out there. It's a concept, it's a word, it's a notion. Robert, with the arrival of the metaverse, what do we imagine and what can we expect from learning? And I mean, how is learning going to play in that space?
Yeah, well, I don't think we have the arrival of the metaverse quite yet. I mean, what is the metaverse, right? It's up for debate. But like fundamentally, the metaverse is basically, imagining a live 3D world where people come together. Maybe it's platform agnostic. It involves wearables like this, right? And it fully immerses people. If you've never been in VR, you're missing out on why it's so exciting to be in these virtual worlds. It reorients you to your body in interesting ways and immerses you in highly engaging ways. Having said that, the metaverse is problematic on a couple of realms. One is kids and the metaverse. The COPA restrictions, this idea that the Child Online Privacy and Protection Act, make it really difficult to collect data from kids playing. And the metaverse works. I think the metaverse succeeds most when it has multimodal analytics. Not to get too technical, but this idea of what they do really well is they track behaviors. And the metaverse promises not only to track sort of what you're doing from an interactive standpoint, clicking and stuff like that, but tracking what you're looking at, how your body is moving, all of this stuff. And I think the ability of the metaverse to really do multimodal analytics, I think it's going to take it to the next level. And that's really hard to do with kids because people are freaked out with their kids are getting tracked. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But in general, with the metaverse, we've already seen it in terms of virtual worlds, worlds like Roblox, even Minecraft to a certain extent sort of promises this kind of like immersive community. Any parent who has a neurodiverse kid will tell you once, I've heard multiple parents tell me, this is anecdotal, that when they put headphones on their child in the online learning environments, all of a sudden children were far more engaged with the lessons. So, and when I bring that up only to say that immersion like that can actually be really good for attention, driving attention, which is a problem with young people in general. So I think with the metaverse, we're going to see a lot happening on the Meta side, on Microsoft, Epic. I think it's a ways off in terms of like, impacting learning necessarily because of those challenges of how do you immerse kids meaningfully and in a way that is not going to violate their privacy. Does that make sense?
It does. Fantastic. And to you, Matthias, given that you're working in the metaverse space and with the metaverse studio at Globant, what kind of advice do you give to a company that is looking at the metaverse learning products, looking to enhance engagement? How do you address some other questions? How do you help them define the kind of product they're looking to develop?
Absolutely. So as Robert mentioned, metaverse has been a very revolutionary keyword on the last month. But if you take a look at the overall structure, it has actually been around for quite some time already. The thing is that we are just renaming and giving it like a more body. But I think that we always like to start with, as many people may say on Simon Sinek, is start with why. Like what are you trying to achieve? Do you want to get engagement for your students? Do you want to do situational training? Do you want to teach them how to react to specific situations? Do you want to teach them specific concepts? And how can you achieve that? It will end up in the advice that we can give not only on the strategic point of view, but also on the overall project. Like Robert was showcasing a VR device. Not all the educational experiences are suitable for a VR, form factor. VR has characteristics that you can take advantage, but it also has some other things that you cannot take advantage, and that introduce a lot of concepts. So typically we always start to nail down, what is the big objective that they have. And we know a lot of companies has metaverse on, their objectives. They don't know what can be done. They don't know how can it be done. So typically we start like that, right? Like, what are you trying to achieve? What is your main objective? And then try to design a program that will create the artifacts. Those could be like VR experiences, could be, and we are working with educational companies. In fact, I saw some of the names even on this, so I hope to keep connecting with those. That they are creating different experiences. What I think that the metaverse can bring us a revolution in that sense is that we have seen companies creating a couple of games, but they are all disconnected. They might be connected by the LMS system and the let's say the analytics on the back end, but I think metaverse can introduce that level of interaction. It's like when we saw the first Avenger movies, they were all disconnected. By the fifth movie, you could see the MCU potential, right? So I think that now a lot of these companies on the metaverse, or as using metaverse as a key pillar, can create that MCU, that Marvel Cinematic Universe, that will give more purpose to one specific game, one specific simulation, one specific, let's say, experience. And then what we always like to mention is that, especially on games we are more used to, but in a lot of these disciplines, you have to think on these projects as TV series or animated series or animated movies. Don't try to take them into the software development process, because they have a lot of storytelling. They actually have a lot of, sentiments, suspension of disbelief, that is more close to a Mandalorian episode than it is to, a software product that you can develop. So typically we like to advise companies to take it slowly, to be smart on how we produce these things. Like actually producing 3D content, VR, it's expensive. So you really need to be convinced on that. And then, setting up the expectations on that level, that I think that it could be good. Then another trend that I actually got yesterday, I was doing an NFT training, and they actually give me an NFT as a certificate. So I think that even without being too close to the metaverse, I think that blockchain, NFTs has a big power. And as we also see a big trend on gaming that is called play and earn, there's also a big trend on learn and earn. So I think that there's also big opportunities again to connect a lot of these places. And as educational companies, we can actually have the opportunity to create these universes.
Yeah, can I just respond?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I love that you brought that up, because there's a bunch of startups on the West Coast right now on blockchain and gaming, precisely to do what you were saying, Matthias, which is, let players, if they're going to co-create the games and create user-generated content, let's enable them from a platform perspective to monetize that. And I don't know much about learning and earning, but it makes sense from a motivational standpoint, that there's, and I'd be fascinated to hear more about that at some point.
Sure, absolutely. I can share. I was also surprised to see, and they also have different mechanics. Like you onboard people, and you're being granted more NFTs, and those NFTs are having more and more value. So it's super interesting. I actually know about NFTs, but got into the training just to get this NFT certificate at the end.
I'm glad you brought up the the Marvel universe. There's a big trend right now in Hollywood where movies, or CGI movies especially, are being developed in game engines, or at least pre-visualized in game engines. So Unreal Engine 4, for example, was used to create in VR, Jon Favreau did all of the pre-visualization for the live action, quote unquote, Lion King in VR, actually. So there's this, at a fundamental technical level, these kind of like all these areas of entertainment, at least, are kind of merging in an interesting way. And it's going to be more challenging to have that happen in education, I think, but it's inevitable, I would think.
Yeah, it's I think that for content production, it's going to be amazing. Like virtual production, Mandalorian, and Disney actually created a specific unit. And that's why I reinforce the message that I think that as educational institutions can get closer to that type of companies, the level of content that they can produce and the level of engagement they can get, it's going to skyrocket.
Wonderful.
So when new platform, one more quick point.
Yeah,
When
go for it.
When new platforms emerge, games are always are the ones to take advantage of them first. Why? Because games are transactional and they can drive revenue. So smartphones emerge, even feature phones emerge, and all of a sudden everyone's, gaming studios pop up to take advantage of that. Same thing happened in VR. Same thing is going to happen with the metaverse, where games are there. The great thing about games and learning and education games is they tend to drive premium price points. Even today, if putting an educational mobile app onto iOS, Apple will tell you, please, try to, raise your price on that. Parents like to spend more money on educational apps because they actually think that's a signal of quality. So it's one of the sweet space in education where you can drive better revenues than you can in the free-to-play model, for example, which no one would trust in the educational content necessarily.
Well, fantastic. Well, believe it or not, gentlemen, we've come up on our time. I would like to really thank you both. This was a fascinating, very engaging conversation, and I'm sure we could take it on for a while longer. And I'd like to thank our audience for their great questions. And now, Paulette, I'd like to welcome you back for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Agustin, and thank you, Robert and Matthias, for that insightful discussion. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions, but we will be happy to share your questions and your comments with the speakers and get in touch soon. Please be on the lookout for any of our future events. And if you are planning on attending the ASU Plus GSV Summit in April, please stop by our booth, which is number 220A. If you have any other questions, please contact us at events@globant.com or visit our website, www.globant.com. On behalf of Globant and our speakers, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of day.